atmosphere. It's in all the Kannada papers of the state in this morning's editions. But at the end of the day, I'm an academic. I'm a scholar, teacher, I'm a professor of political science. So I feel most at home, most comfortable in an education of learning, and especially in an education of higher education like this one, with a hallowed history. As we were being escorted into this auditorium by the NCC boys and girls, I was admiring the very distinctive architecture of this building. I tend to have an interest in such things. I congratulate all the administrators, teachers, staff and students of this institution for completing a real milestone, 150 years of teaching and learning in this city about 7 years ago. I think that is when you had your 150th anniversary. And may I personally extend my best wishes to you for the next 50, 100 and 150 years. How I wish I could address you today in Kannada or in Tulu, but since I'm unable to do so, with your permission, I will do so in English. A great deal can be said about Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose and his life of struggle for India's freedom. But I won't take more than 10 or 15 minutes of your time. Therefore, I will need to distill what I have to say into a few key points. Netaji, of course, is rightly celebrated, revered, adulated by the people all across this country for his courage, for his fiery patriotism, for his resolve and his determination to liberate India and her people from the colonial yoke. It's perhaps the greatest tragedy of independent India that Subhas Chandra Bose did not get a chance. He was tragically denied the chance, the opportunity, by a tragic twist of fate, to play his rightful role in rebuilding and reconstructing a new India after 200 years of the ravages of colonialism. But let's not dwell on historic tragedies. There's no point in dwelling on that. What is perhaps less known about Subhas Chandra Bose in the popular perception of him is that he was a very deep thinker. He was, as Professor Radhakrishna rightly realized when he was translating his two seminal works, An Indian Pilgrim and The Indian Struggle, he was a man of a deeply reflective philosophical bent from his childhood onwards. Yes, he was a fiery revolutionary, he was a mesmerizing orator, he cut a supremely dashing figure as the supreme commander of the Indian National Army, the Azad Hind Fauj, and as the head of state of the Provisional Government of Free India, Arzi Hukumat-e-Azad Hind, which he proclaimed in Singapore on October 21st, 1943. But there was another side to Subhas Chandra Bose which perfectly and seamlessly complemented the better-known public side of his personality. That was the deeply reflective, introspective, philosophically inclined, and one can say, a somewhat academic and intellectual person. There are two books that have been translated into Kannada, and for this great initiative, I have to congratulate Professor Radhakrishna, the publisher, Mr. Shekhar Reddy of Sunstar Publishing, Sri M. Rajkumar, who heads up the Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose Trust in Bangalore, and all of their colleagues. You probably heard a synopsis from the previous speaker, who spoke mostly in Kannada. An Indian pilgrim, Netaji called his unfinished autobiography. It's his personal account. It's a fascinating read of his origins, of where and how he grew up, who influenced him. People like Beni Madhav Das, his teacher at the Ravenshaw Collegiate School in Cuttack, and then, through his writings, Swami Vivekananda, who had passed away by then, he's over there on the wall, but who proved to be a lifelong inspiration to Subhas Chandra Bose once Subhas Chandra Bose encountered his teachings and his message through Swamiji's writings. This, An Indian Pilgrim, his early life autobiography, is a story in his own words of his growing up, his upbringing, how he imbibed the values that came to define his life and his personality. So, in short, it's in his own words, in an autobiographical telling. It is the story of the formation and the making of Subhas Chandra Bose, India's future Netaji. What better way to learn about Netaji than in his own words, writing about the influences that shaped him, how he decided to abandon his career in the Indian civil service and plunge into the national movement in the cause of India's freedom, under the leadership of not just Mahatma Gandhi, but the great leader of Bengal at the time, Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das, or C.R. Das. The other volume was published in January 1935. It's called The Indian Struggle. It was published from London by a very reputable British publishing company called Wishart and Company. When it was published, it was immediately banned in India, and it was not available in India except in a clandestine form until after independence. The funny thing, however, is that it remained freely available in Great Britain, where it was widely read and very positively reviewed in the British press, the imperialist press, our enemy press of the time, in papers such as the Manchester Guardian, the Sunday Times, the Daily Herald, the News Chronicle, the Spectator, and so on. They raved, all of them, about the acute intelligence and analytical ability of this young leader of the Indian freedom struggle called Subhas Chandra Bose. I think the reviewer of the Manchester Guardian was so carried away. He said that when I finished reading this book, I just had a feeling, I had a personal wish that Mr. Bose take a leading role in the politics and the future of India. So this is the enemy press, the British press of the mid-1930s, writing about Subhas Chandra Bose in these terms. So what had he written in the Indian struggle? It is an account in his own words, through his own perspective. It's a first-hand perspective, but it's also an intellectual reflection at the same time of the Indian freedom struggle as it was waged under Mahatma Gandhi's leadership from 1920 to 1934. So that was the title of the book when it was published, Subhas Chandra Bose, The Indian Struggle, 1920 to 1934. And there is a lot in the book, as Professor Radhakrishna and others among you who have come across the book, have read it, will know, that is self-critical. There is actually some criticism of Gandhi as well. He brings out the political genius of Mahatma Gandhi. He shows quite clearly why Gandhi has been able to rouse the Indian masses and become the supreme leader of this glorious struggle for freedom. But at the same time, he doesn't deify Gandhi. He knows that Gandhiji, like all of us, is a great human being, but unlike all of us, is a great human being. We are ordinary mortals, but at the end of the day, he is also a human being who naturally has failings, vulnerabilities, and so on. Later, and this is another story, when Netaji was traveling by submarine on a German U-boat from Northern Europe all the way to Southeast Asia, he started on February 9th, 1943, from a Baltic seaport called Kiel. It's in the north of Germany. And he ended that epic journey 93 or 94 days later on May 13th, 1943, in Sumatra, which is part of Indonesia today. And on around daybreak, on April 28th, 1943, there was a mid-ocean transfer in choppy seas in the Indian Ocean, can you believe it, off the coast of Madagascar. Netaji and his only Indian companion, Abid Hassan, who was from not very far from here, from Hyderabad, were transferred from the German U-boat to a Japanese submarine for the remainder of their journey to East Asia. Well, in February 1943, during the first part of that epic voyage across the world, while World War II raged around them, including in the seas and oceans, including in the Atlantic in particular, Netaji told Abid Hassan, who functioned as his secretary among other things, that I want to update the Indian struggle. So we worked together on the German submarine during February 1943, and the Indian struggle was updated until the time of the Quit India movement, when Gandhiji called that mass uprising with an ultimatum to the British to quit India, with the slogans, do or die, liberty or death. Those were Gandhiji's slogans. That was his final message that he gave to the Indian people before he was taken into custody. So the magnum opus, this brilliant political tract of Subhas Chandra Bose, became the Indian Struggle 1920 to 1942. My father, Dr. Shishir Bose, about whom Dinesh Gundurao spoke briefly during his address, always believed that it is not sufficient or satisfactory to just put up a statue of Netaji and do floral homage. He regarded that as vacuous hero worship, without any substance or content or real meaning. My father, Dr. Shishir Bose, believed that in order to really pay tribute to Netaji's contribution to our freedom, we need to understand Netaji's ideals, his principles, what he stood for. And what better way, what he believed in, the vision he had. He had a very, very clear-cut, concrete vision for free India, which a historic tragedy denied him the attempt, the chance to implement. What better way to really understand Subhas Chandra Bose in all his aspects, the more private aspect as well as the more public political aspect, what he believed in, what he preached, what he practiced, what he intended India to be after its liberation than to read his writings in his own words. There can be no better source than that, right? So that is why about 45 years ago, my father, Dr. Shishir Bose, started publishing Netaji's collected works. Now, Netaji's collected works are available in 12 volumes in English. The first volume is An Indian Pilgrim, the autobiography of his early life. Volume 2, the second volume, is The Indian Struggle, 1920 to 1942. Then there are 10 more volumes in chronological order, and there is also a very useful compilation or distillation that the Netaji Research Bureau, of which I am the director at Kolkata's historic Netaji Bhavan, our former ancestral mansion, where Professor Radhakrishna and Sri Rajkumar visited earlier this month to invite me to come here. There is also a Netaji Research Bureau edition, which does very well, called The Essential Writings of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, a distillation, which was published at the time of Netaji's birth centenary in 1997. There are also 10 volumes of Netaji collected works, edited by my father in Bengali, and there are also 11 volumes, I think, in Hindi, Netaji Sampurna Vangmay, that is what it's called in Hindi. That was a good start, a very good start, well done, but not enough. We are a country of great cultural and linguistic diversity. Netaji is literally worshipped across the length and breadth of India, in every region, in every state, by all communities, irrespective of caste, creed, religion, and many other differences and divides. 80 years after he left this mortal world, Subhas Chandra Bose is, I believe, the ultimate symbol, the personification of the spirit of India's unity. Okay? So, for those of us who are in one way or the other custodians of his legacy, it is our duty to bring Netaji's writings, and through his writings, his values, his principles, his ideals, the whole story of his valorous life of struggle, to people across this country in their own languages, in their own mother tongues. Now, that is why it is such a wonderful initiative that our colleagues in Karnataka have undertaken, and I've already thanked them by name. At Netaji Bhavan in Kolkata, where Rajkumar and Professor Radhakrishna were just 2 or 3 weeks ago, we get hundreds, on many days thousands of visitors from all over India, fitting every kind of profile of India. Many of them are from Karnataka, different parts of Karnataka. I'm also aware how internally diverse your beautiful state is. And literally, people have asked me, can we not read Netaji's writings in Kannada, in our own language? And, I had to kind of scratch my head and hum and haw and said, unfortunately, not available yet. Now, from now on, I and all of you, everybody on this stage, everybody in this audience, can proudly say, yes, you can read Netaji's life story in his own words, in your own language, Kannada. Netaji had 2 unique qualities, and this is the final part of what I want to say to you today. Netaji had, to my mind, 2 unique qualities. First of all, was an unique ability to motivate and inspire people, individuals, to bring out the best in them. to motivate otherwise ordinary people, people like you and me, to great deeds in the service of their country and in the cause of India's freedom. My father, Dr. Shishir Bose, he was a pediatrician in his professional life. He was a 20-year-old medical student when one day in December 1940, his uncle Subhash, whom he called Ranga Kakababu in Bengali within the family, called him to his bedroom. And my father had no idea why his famous uncle is summoning him, and said to him in Bengali, our language, Bangla, "Amar ekta kaj korte parbe?" That literally translates as, "Can you do something for me?" in a very gentle tone. So my father said, "Yeah, sure." And he thought he would have to post a letter or draft a telegram or run some kind of an errand. That is what he expected. But instead, Subhas Chandra Bose, who had just got out of his 11th and final imprisonment in the prisons of the British Raj, after going on a hunger strike, a fast unto death, wanted his young nephew, Shishir, my father, to help him to escape the country so that he could wage the final war for India's independence from abroad, taking in advantage of the strategic opportunities presented by World War II. I was very happy to hear. I want to learn more about local histories, about which we are often so ignorant and unaware. When Dinesh Gundu Rao said that there was an uprising against colonial rule long before 1857 in this part of India, I had never heard of this. I want to know more about this. But Netaji always took as his benchmark, when he lectured people, he would say the first war of Indian independence was 1857, 1858, the Great Revolt, which came very close to liberating our subcontinent and driving our enslavers and occupiers out of this subcontinent, but ultimately failed. And he said that now the time is ripe, thanks to the Second World War and the strategic opportunities it presents to us as a colonized nation, to launch the climactic final war of India's independence. For that, we need our own army. The good news is that we don't need to create our army from scratch. The army is already there, recruited, trained, and equipped. Our colonial masters have done our work for us. All we need to do is to turn their loyalties from the British Empire to the cause of India's freedom. And all of you know how those people who had been fighting for the British and had been trained to think of the British Raj as their Mai Baap, how they responded to Netaji's clarion call to become soldiers in the final war of Indian independence. So he had this unique ability to motivate, inspire individuals, bring out the best in them. There are leaders who bring out the worst in people, deliberately or inadvertently. Subhas Chandra Bose had this knack, this virtue of bringing out the very best in Indians, and very different kinds of Indians, people professing different religious faiths, of different caste identities, speaking many different languages, and men and women as well. You heard briefly about the Rani Jhansi regiment, which was headed by Lakshmi Swaminathan, later Lakshmi Saigal. She is, of course, a legend of the Indian freedom struggle in her own right. So, if you read these books, you will get a sense of what Netaji stood for. three things at least I would highlight. One, the harmony, the essential intrinsic unity of India, and the harmony and equality of all its communities, transcending the differences and divides. He believed that India is essentially one, but to translate that intrinsic unity into a living reality, we need to treat all individuals and all communities with respect, in a spirit of absolute equality. No one is more or less equal or more or less worthy than anybody else, regardless of their background, community, occupation, and so on. He practiced, he implemented what he preached. And that is why the Indian National Army and the Azad Hind movement, under his command in that final war of Indian independence, became such an exemplary showcase of Indian unity. Second, he believed, he had a vision for free India. He thought very deeply about what India should be as a free country, how India should be reconstructed after its liberation. Among other things, he was a very modern-minded person, and that was part of his differences with Gandhiji, because Gandhiji was more of a traditional person. He had a traditional Indian mentality, while Subhas Chandra Bose was an arch modernist. So Netaji believed in the importance, in the necessity of planned development in reconstructing our country from the ravages of 2 centuries of colonial occupation. Some of you will know that during his first term of his 2 terms as Indian National Congress president in November, December 1938, it was he who established the National Planning Committee, the precursor of the Pro-Independence Planning Commission. So he tried to give realistic shape to all his ideas. And finally, his absolute belief and commitment to the equality of women and men. On July 12th, 1943, he addressed the first group of 24 recruits to the Rani Jhansi regiment, which eventually grew to be 1,500 strong. These were the first 24 recruits. They were still not in uniforms, as you see in somewhat later photographs. They were wearing saris, but they were carrying British Lee Enfield 303 rifles, which they had been trained to use by male INA officers. And he gave a memorable speech to that first group of 24 recruits. And he said that I am convinced that unless and until India's women take their rightful place as equal participants in our liberation struggle, India cannot hope to be free. He said that in unambiguous terms. This is back in 1943. And he urged Indian women who had taken up the rifle to liberate India to fight alongside their male compatriots in the final war of independence. He said to them that I want you to emulate 2 great women of history. One is Joan of Arc of France, the other is Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi, the heroine of the 1857-1858 revolt. So that was his vision of women's rights, of the equality of the genders. Once again, both women and men must contribute to rebuilding India, making it a great country in the world stage. But that can only happen if women are treated equally to men. And he was absolutely committed to that. So that, in summary, is what he stood for. He was a great inspirer, a great motivator, and he was a great unifier. No other leader in the galaxy of leaders thrown up by a freedom struggle achieved the kind of pan-Indian unity that Subhas Chandra Bose did, especially in that climactic struggle waged under his leadership, Azad Hind, 1943 to 1945. Even Gandhiji never achieved that level of pan-Indian unity that Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose achieved. He was a great unifier, and that perhaps, as Dinesh Kundu Rao said, there are so many forces at work that want to divide us for their own selfish reasons and purposes. It is all the more important to hark back to that message of unity. Now, Netaji did not only preach about unity, he was a doer, he was not a talker. He talked also, he was a great orator, but he did what he preached. He showed it can be done. That pan-Indian unity, cutting across all our differences and divides, is a realizable, achievable aim. We can make that innate unity that we have as a nation a living reality. And he showed how to do it. I want to end this address, which has gone on longer than I intended, by remembering a brave son of India who was from this Mangalore region, from Dakshina Kannada, from coastal Karnataka. This was a young man by the name of A. Yelappa, Attavar Yelappa. He was Yelappa Attavar. So he was a London qualified lawyer. He qualified in London, and then he moved to Singapore to work for a law firm there. Singapore, of course, in 1940 was under British occupation. The Japanese captured it in February 1942, and a year or so later, Netaji arrives in Singapore after that epic submarine voyage across the world in wartime. And Yelappa Attavar is among those military personnel and civilians who give Netaji a grand reception on his arrival at the airport in Singapore on July 2nd, 1943. Yelappa Attavar is barely into his 30s. He's a young man, a very young man. But he's already the chairman of the Singapore branch of the Indian Independence League, or the IIL. He serves the movement with complete devotion and great ability from then onwards. Yelappa Attavar was one of the principal fundraisers of the Azad Hind movement. Yelappa Attavar was also the founder of the Central Bank of the Provisional Government of Free India, the Azad Hind Bank, which was established in Rangoon, Burma in 1944. A leading participant, a great and heroic contributor to the last war of India's independence, the decisive war, which made India independent only 2 years later, waged under the leadership of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. But there's a tragic end to the tale, in a way. Like his revered leader, Netaji, Yelappa Attavar was denied the opportunity. He was clearly a man of great and many talents, to play his rightful role in the rebuilding of free India, because he was martyred, he became a shaheed, towards the end of the war in Burma in June 1945. And 3 months later, his supreme leader, the subcontinent's revered Netaji, suffered the same fate. I'd like to end with Netaji's last words to his countrymen and countrywomen. So, on the afternoon, mid-afternoon, maybe around 2:30, 3 o'clock, 3 p.m., around this time actually. It's August 18th, 1945. So Japan has announced its surrender just a few days before, after the American atomic bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Netaji is unfazed. He says, well, Japanese may have decided to surrender, they're entitled to take their own decisions, but as far as we are concerned, our struggle will continue until India's freedom is achieved. We are unfazed, okay? And he inculcated the same spirit of defiance in his associates and followers. On the afternoon, around this time in the afternoon, August 18th, 1945, two Indians, a very famous one, Subhas Chandra Bose, and another Indian, a colonel in the Indian National Army called Habibur Rahman. They are lying side by side, both wounded, just off the airfield, just off the tarmac, in the airfield of Taipei. It had the Japanese name Taihoku in those days. Their plane had crashed on takeoff. And Colonel Habibur Rahman was lightly wounded, relatively lightly wounded, but unfortunately, I won't give you the detailed description here, Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose was badly burned and he was critically injured. I think Netaji realized that he's not going to make it. So, as they lay together side by side, the relatively lightly wounded Habibur Rahman and the critically injured Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, Netaji gave his countrymen and countrywomen his last message through Habibur Rahman. First he asked Habibur Rahman, "Aapko zyada to nahi laga?" Okay, this is what he said. So, and he probably could see that Habib was not that badly injured and probably would survive. And if he survived, then there was a good chance that he will make it back to Hindustan, India. Now, Netaji wanted to make, as the national language of free India, Hindustan, Urdu-Hindi hybrid. And it was actually successful. Many of the civilian recruits to the INA and to the broader movement in Southeast Asia were Tamil speakers, including many of the recruits to the Rani Jhansi regiment, the women's combat regiment, under Lakshmi Swaminathan. But, this is the spirit of unity, of being together in a common struggle. Those Tamil-speaking people picked up Hindustani without any complaint, without any problem in a matter of months. It is difficult to imagine this now, but they did, and very willingly and very competently. So Netaji gave his last message, what in my language, Bengali, Bangla, we would call the Ontim Bani, the final message to his countrymen and countrywomen through Colonel Habibur Rahman, his ADC, who was accompanying him on that last flight. And Habib tried to commit it to memory right away because he realized this is a historic moment. He must remember it word for word as faithfully as possible so he can do the duty that has been, the task that has been assigned him and deliver that message to the nation once he reaches India. And Netaji said, according to Habibur Rahman, after inquiring after his well-being, "Aapko zyada to nahi laga?" He said, "Jab aap mulk wapas jaye, jab aap mulk wapas jaye, when you go back to the homeland, jab aap mulk wapas jaye, मुल्की भाइयों को बताना कि मैं आखिरी दम तक आज़ादी के लिए लड़ते रहे. Please tell the brothers, the countrymen, that I fought for freedom till my last breath. वो जंग ए आज़ादी जारी रखे. They must continue the war of liberation. And then was the last phrase. हिंदुस्तान आज़ाद होगा, हिंदुस्तान को कोई गुलाम नहीं रख सकता. India, Hindustan will be free. No one can keep India enslaved anymore. So that was the spirit of the man. He gave his all for the country, but he also received something in return. It's 80 years since he's gone. He's left us. His flame burns brighter and brighter, I think, with every passing year in the hearts of hundreds of millions of Indians, men and women, people of all regions, religions, castes, creeds, communities. There cannot be a greater honor for any leader than to receive such spontaneous love from his countrymen and countrywomen. So I would say that India, the people of India, down to this young generation who are sitting at the back of the auditorium today, who are still in school or in college, they have done their best to repay the debt they owe to Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, that the debt that all of us, individually and collectively, owe to Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose by giving him their unstinted love. May it always remain this way. He gave his all for us, and we have tried to reciprocate his supreme sacrifice by giving him the love that he really deserves. There cannot be any greater honor for a political leader. In that sense, Subhas Chandra Bose is a very fortunate man, 8 decades after he left this mortal world. You know that India's national slogan, Jai Hind, was coined by the Azad Hind movement in its German phase in 1942. This is before Netaji left Europe to come to Southeast Asia and East Asia. It was actually, the Jai Hind was actually coined by Abid Hassan, the person from Hyderabad who accompanied Netaji on that epic submarine voyage around the world. But Jai Hind became a slogan starting actually with Pandit Nehru's midnight speech, 14th-15th August 1947, when he said, Jai Hind, and then it became like a ritual for all Indian prime ministers during the Red Fort Ramparts address on Independence Day to end it with Jai Hind thrice. We all know that. But in the Azad Hind movement and in the INA, in the Azad Hind Fauj, Jai Hind was not used as a slogan, but as an interpersonal greeting between comrades in struggle. So, for example, say Mohammad Zaman Kiani, who was the top field commander of the INA, would greet Netaji by saying, Jai Hind, Netaji. And Netaji would reply, Jai Hind, Kiani. Okay, so it's in the same way that Jai Hind is used as the interpersonal greeting for the last 30 or so years in the Indian Army among the personnel. Officers and ranks and ranks. Yeah? The war cry, the slogan of the last war of Indian independence was, of course, famously, Chalo Delhi. Chalo Delhi. Onward to Delhi. Forward to Delhi. So I won't end this address with Jai Hind because it was a greeting, not a slogan. I won't end it with Chalo Delhi because it might even get a different meaning in the present day and context. So I will end it with the rousing slogans that were used at the end of public rallies, meetings and parades during the final war of India's independence waged under Netaji's leadership from 1943 to 1945, primarily in Southeast Asia, but also in the jungles of Manipur and Nagaland, in those hill tracts and those forests where a glorious chapter of Indian valor against great adversity was written in 1944. So how did those meetings, parades end? Well, it ended with a triple slogan: Netaji Zindabad, Inqilab Zindabad, Azad Hind Zindabad.